So I will talk about the limitations of geometrical acoustics modeling. And I start with acknowledging what we learned yesterday, that the numerical solution of the wave equation we could consider as the gold standard, so to say, in room acoustic simulation. But it is very computationally costly for high frequencies. Even though people in Salford, Reading, Edinburgh, Eindhoven are working hard to fix that problem, it seems. So geometrical acoustics is still the foundation for most prediction softwares used in practice in room acoustics, like Odeon, Cat Acoustic, Ramsete by Angelo, who is here today. But there are limitations, as we know more or less accurately what they actually are. I will make a little disclaimer here, that saying that I will disregard what could possibly be called energy flow methods, but I think that we will hear later today about such methods. And I will show a little quote from a paper in 1944, from 1944 by Morse and Bolt about sound waves in rooms. They in turn quoted Vern Knudsen in his, I think, book from the 30s, saying that the approximate theories, meaning geometrical acoustics, when used with caution and understanding, have served satisfactorily for the practical purposes of acoustical designing, and they still are. But then there's also a fun little sentence following. Such a state of affairs may be satisfactory to the engineer. It is not at all satisfactory to the physicist. So you have to choose sides. A little recap of what geometrical acoustics is. In geometrical acoustics, we assume that we can decompose the sound field into deterministic components and what we can call diffuse components, or stochastic components. With deterministic, we have of course, the specular reflections, which can be modeled in different flavors of geometrical acoustics, either taking the phase, complex pressure into account, or just studying pressure squared. It is possible to extend with edge diffraction, and it could be possible to extend it with radiation from surface vibrations. If we know a surface vibration, we could let them radiate following geometrical acoustics laws. But then for diffuse components, where we are not aiming at getting an accurate sound pressure prediction, but just the energy as function of time or intensity. So that would include diffuse reflections, or surface scattering, as it can be called, or any combination of specular reflections and diffuse reflections. And central to geometrical acoustics is that all of these components will be subject to visibility tests, which we will see some examples of a little bit later. And here, one crucial missing component is the combination of edge diffraction and diffuse reflections, which is not completely clear how that should be done efficiently. Alexander Paul and Uwe Stevenson in Hamburg, they have suggested a method where rays are bent around edges. But that seems to work, but so far they have studied only rays, studying rays in the forward direction around edges. And shamelessly, I'm also going to advertise a paper by Lauri Savioja and myself in JASA just a few weeks ago with an overview of different techniques in geometrical acoustics. So some questions that we can look at today. Can geometrical acoustics handle phase effects interference, which can be extended to the question of if geometrical acoustics can model room modes correctly. Related to that is if geometrical acoustics can handle complex wall impedances. It is clear that geometrical acoustics creates wavefront discontinuities. Can diffraction modeling fix that? And I will show some animations that illustrate that. And a separate last question about handling curved surfaces. So, if specular reflections are modeled with phase, which can be done either via impulse response or transfer function synthesis, which has been used by Odeon and Cat Acoustics since early 90s, I guess, for auralisation purposes, or what has been called the phased beam tracing, then geometrical acoustics can predict complex sound pressure for some cases, like a shoebox room with hard walls. If we have rigid walls, then the image source solution is exactly the same as the model solution. With hard walls, a small amount of losses, then room modes can also be modeled correctly by image sources. If we have any other room shape with hard walls, so very low losses, specular reflection plus edge diffraction could give accurate predictions for all but the very lowest frequencies. But this has not been studied in detail yet, but it should be within the possibilities for this combination. For complex wall impedances, specular reflections are implemented in different ways. They're quite common and very simple. Implementation is to say that the reflected sound pressure squared is attenuated given by the random incidence absorption coefficient. And the very good argument for doing it like that is that this is the input data that we have available. It could be done a bit more detailed if we had access to measure the data on the absorption coefficient as function of incidence angle, or more correctly, if we know the complex impedance. Here we have the normalized wall impedance. And this is often called the plane wave reflection coefficient, or we can do it even more accurately with a spherical reflection coefficient, which is much more computationally heavy because it will involve an integral of some analytical expression of the reflected sound. And it has been demonstrated by the group in Aachen that we can get quite an accurate or very accurate prediction of room modes effects with plane wave reflection coefficient. And I think that Lam, you showed in 2004, you demonstrated this in Awaji Island, I remember. That using this spherical reflection coefficient, which is very costly, but it can give very accurate results for low frequencies, so mode effects. Now we step on to the next topic, which I kind of like because you can generate nice looking animations. We saw animations yesterday, but what will be a little bit special about this is that I will show both what it looks like if we have ceiling reflectors and we model with pure geometrical acoustics, pure specular reflections. And we see what happens is that we get truncated wavefronts. So that there are points here that are just outside these wavefronts which are not reached by those reflections. Which is of course a bit non-physical. And how important it is, that will depend on the actual situation. There are so many reflections that after a while it doesn't matter so much if we have a very open geometry. But if we add edge diffraction components, we'll see that we will get continuous wavefronts. And we will generally get sound spreading in more direction, reaching everywhere. There's still some discontinuity signs that we can see because this is with an implementation only of first order diffraction. But that is already healing much of these discontinuities. And if we step back a little bit here, if we look at this part here, for instance, this is a part of the wavefront which has been generated only by edge diffraction from this edge here. The frequency content of such a diffraction wave is low pass filtered, which means that the diffraction effects are stronger the lower the frequency. So for very high frequencies, this will indeed be a very, very accurate solution. So the discontinuities more inaccurate the lower the frequency. So what are there limitations to this diffraction extension to geometrical acoustics? It is so that for a wedge with rigid surfaces, the Neumann boundary condition, we can get an exact solution with diffraction modeling. But of course we don't have many of these in reality. We have impedance boundaries, impedance surfaces. And there is no exact solution yet for this case, except for the 90-degree wedge, for which a solution was presented by Dave Hewitt in Reading earlier this year. And we believe that it should be possible also to derive for the general situation, a diffraction solution. There's just a little complication, and that is that in the same way as that for specular reflections we need high orders of reflections, and when we have geometric methods the complexity scales with the order of reflection. So we will need combinations of diffraction and specular reflection, which adds to the calculation complexity, but it is frequency independent. That is a geometric calculation aspect. And it has been demonstrated by Dinesh Manosha's group that it is possible to do efficient implementations of high order diffraction and specular reflections. Then a last example is what we can do with curved surfaces. And if we look at a kind of alcove in a wall here, which has been approximated with 100 polygons, not the staircase. We learned yesterday that we should avoid staircase modeling. So this is just with a piecewise linear. Then first, with the specular reflection modeling, we will first see that these two wave fronts will be cut off but then the focusing effect will be captured somehow. And then we start to see that we will get 100 individual beams radiating from these specular reflections. Then if we add only first order diffraction again, we can see that the reflections of these large surfaces will be healed, so to say. And again, we will get various discretization effects because we have only first order diffraction. But we can see that if we look at this focusing effect at time, there's a number there which I can't read, but it's around here, I guess. So we can see that it seems like the amplitude are not exactly the same, but the higher the frequency, the more correctly will this focusing effect be modeled, but not for lower frequencies. So the focusing effect is indeed created by geometrical acoustics, accurately at high frequencies, but increasingly inaccurate the lower the frequency. Then I will already summarize this very brief overview, saying that geometrical acoustics can be extended and reach very far, meaning can become very accurate, if we use phase synthesis or handling phase and the plane wave reflection coefficient. But and that's a big but, that requires new input data. If you call Saint-Gobain and ask for accurate complex impedances for material numbers so and so, I think that you will have to wait on the phone for a while. So this is a huge problem. Edge diffraction is improves geometrical acoustics quite substantially, and it is quite a straightforward extension. It is, by the way, I think the right word to call it an extension rather than a hybrid method, because the edge diffraction solution is added to the geometrical acoustic solution. So we are not doing two separate things covering different parts of the frequency range. But we have no solution yet for complex wall impedance, and that's of course a big limitation. And we have a challenges still with surface scattering and diffraction combinations, which might be a low order effect in most or many rooms, but in other rooms, for instance, with very diffusely reflecting walls and geometries with rooms and corridors, etc., then this might be a substantial limitation. But as a kind of input to the discussion this afternoon, getting the right input data, the boundary conditions might be the biggest showstopper for what we can do with geometrical acoustics or any accurate method. And I think I'll stop there. Okay, thank you for your attention.